Everyone at Safe and Just Michigan is thrilled to have you participating. We have you muted. Your microphones are muted to ensure that everyone can hear the panel, but you can ask questions using the chat function on Zoom. At the end of every panel, we will answer questions for as long as time allows. We want to thank each of our co-sponsors for helping us get the news out after this event changed from an in-person event to a virtual event. Our national partner, Cut 50, AFSC, Michigan Criminal Justice Program, A.R.R.O, Citizen for Prison Reform, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, Michigan Center for Youth Justice, Michigan Faith in Action, Nation Outside, Still Standing, Against Domestic Violence, Redeemed, the University of Michigan Carceral State Project, the University of Michigan Prison Creative Arts Project. For those of you who want to revisit this discussion, we are streaming this event live on the Safe and Just Michigan Facebook page through Facebook Live, and you can engage with other people all across the country by engaging with the hashtags, #Day of Empathy, #Empathy365 throughout the day on social media. And I'd like to turn this over to Josh Ho, a policy director for Safe and Just Michigan and moderator of this conversation.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon on this beautiful day. My name is Josh Ho, and I'm policy analyst at Safe and Just Michigan. Today, I have the pleasure of having a discussion with two of my favorite people. Chief Justice Bridget McCormack joined the Michigan Supreme Court in January 2013 and became Chief Justice in January 2019. Before her election to the court in November 2012, she was a law professor and dean at the University of Michigan Law School. She is a graduate of the New York University Law School. She was co-chair of Michigan's Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration, which we're here to talk about today. Monica Jahner is the program manager at Advocacy, Reentry, Resources, and Outreach, also known as A.R.R.O, an Ingham County grassroots program working to eliminate barriers faced by people released from prison. She is formerly incarcerated activist, appointed to the task force by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She's also a JLUSA fellow and a member of Nation Outside, and also one of my really good friends. Thanks so much for doing this, both of you, and welcome to the Day of Empathy.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for organizing it.
Absolutely. So let's start with what's first on everyone's mind right now, the COVID crisis. I know we'll get to the task force in a second, but Chief Justice McCormack, can you tell us about the measures that the courts and the state have been putting into effect around COVID-19 and our criminal justice system here in Michigan?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is obviously mostly what we're working on right now. I feel like I talked about nothing but jail and pretrial reform and task force recommendations for many months, and then all of a sudden I talked about nothing but COVID-19, and that's all I'm thinking about now. Here at the Supreme Court, because we are constitutionally charged with administering the courts of the state, we've been working around the clock on emergency orders to guide the trial courts in responding to the governor's orders and being responsible partners in dealing with this public health crisis, while balancing, of course, the important public safety and constitutional rights that courts are charged with monitoring. And so it's a delicate balance. We've issued a number of emergency orders already, emergency administrative orders, my court has, and we at this point have trial courts throughout the state limited to doing essential and emergency functions, and we've tried to define those. I won't bore you with all the details of that, for in-person proceedings, and then trying to do as much as possible with the consent of the lawyers and the litigants using video technology. It's our profession has been slow to technology for lots of reasons. There are lots of, I think, explanations for that. And I feel like right now everybody's being forced to learn months worth of technological education every day. So if there's lemonade here, it's that we might come through this with new tools and new processes for the courts of the future, which hopefully will be more friendly to the public. I can say lots more, but I don't want to. I feel like I'm blabbing on and on. So I'll let you direct the questions, Josh, so that I'm not hogging it.
Well, let's see. We were having some technical problems. Has Monica made it into the conversation yet?
I'm in there.
Hey, Monica, how are you?
I'm all right, Josh.
Good to
a little
see you.
frazzled with technology.
All right. In your experience, what makes jails so important as we're experiencing this crisis with COVID-19 right now?
Well, you know, Josh, I did 28 years in prison. So right now my mind is truly focused on all those people that are sitting in there worrying and the fear and all the stuff that's going on. I've been listening to the other panels this morning, and that's all, you know, a lot of people are talking about, because everybody is worried about their family members inside. But what is so important about what we did as the task force, and, you know, our honorable judge did such an amazing job keeping us together, and I've been driving her crazy with the emails and trying to respond to different things that we can to give input coming from the formerly incarcerated conversation. So, but what's so important, Josh, is since I came home in 2007, it's been really important to me that we figure out how we can keep our people in the community instead of sending them to prison and jail. So I've been on a mission since 2007 to figure out how we could do this, and I was extremely blessed to be able to get on this task force and bring that input to that conversation, because that, you know, they're the gateway to the prisons. So we just spent you know, the last what, 6, 7, 8 months putting together these recommendations. And what was so great about them, we looked at a lot of straddle cells. So for those that don't know what a straddle cell is, it's a part of the sentencing guideline where a judge can use his discretion to decide if you go to prison or jail. Well, with the recommendations we made, we what we called what would be a presumptive what was it exactly the word? The judge had to give a higher presumption if they sent him to prison instead of keeping him in jail. So my day job, my paying job, is actually running a day reporting program where the judges can send clients to us 3 days a week, 3 hours a day, and we get all the services out of the way. We reduce the barriers. We get them therapy. We get them their license. We get them their GED, their high school diploma. We get them in apprenticeships. So we feel that very strongly that if we can reduce those barriers out here and keep them with their families and their children, first we'll stop that prison to pipeline cycle. But at the same time, you know, keep our community safer with having those different kind of things. So that's what, you know, why it was so important for what we did with the task force to look at these different kind of things. And that was just one of the recommendations. I'm really excited when I was going through the bills that Justice McCormack sent me, when I saw that part about people having to do their programming and setting and paying their fines and fees before they get off of probation. That's a pet peeve of mine. I can't tell you how many clients sit on probation forever trying to pay off these fines and fees, or the probation officers that, you know, the guy goes out and gets the money to get off, pay the fines and fees, and gets off probation real quick and hasn't done any of the programming that he really needs to change that thinking pattern. So yeah, that's why it's so important. Josh, that what we have done with the task force is going to be huge in our community as soon as we get these passed.
So as you just mentioned, Michigan just finished a groundbreaking task force on jails and pretrial incarceration. The recommendations of that task force have been out for over a month, and legislation is already in the hopper to implement many of those recommendations. How do you think, if implemented, some of the task force recommendations might make a difference in the face of this crisis or future crises, Chief Justice McCormack?
Well, that's a great question. As you, I know you know well, Josh, because I think you're one of the people that probably read every single word of the task force report. The recommendations, we made 18 recommendations. They really do work together. You know, sometimes people ask me which of them would have the biggest impact, and I always say all of them. We have to do all of them because the idea is they all will play a role in reducing our county jail populations in a way that actually enhances public safety, not the opposite. It will make our communities safer and healthier. And if we can get that done, if there's another public health crisis, we won't be scrambling to figure out how to assist our sheriffs and deputy sheriffs who are basically, stuck in what my good friend Deputy Jim Miller calls, the next cruise ships, trying to figure out how to keep themselves and the people they protect in those jails safe. But the recommendations are significant. They each address different parts of the front end criminal justice process, as well as the population of people in our jails who are serving sentences including those serving sentences for violations of probation and parole, especially technical violations. But all of them together would have a significant impact on reducing our county jail populations. I probably should have started with the sort of background big picture data, which is, as I know you know, but maybe not everybody does, our jail populations have tripled over the last 30 years. And crime is, of course, at a 50-year low. So the fact that our jail populations are what they are today hasn't always been the case. It doesn't have to be that way. And we, because of this task force and the data collection it did, we now, for the very first time, have an understanding of what has driven those populations and why it is that they're at such an all-time high, and whether they are in fact making our community safer. There's lots of good research on that. And again, I think I'm going on and on, so I'll let you drive the questions, because I have a lot more to say, but I should answer what's most interesting to you.
Well, hopefully we'll get to all of it. If someone from Safe and Just Michigan could drop a link to the task force report into the chat room so everyone can see it, that would be great. Monica, yesterday when we were emailing back and forth, you were suggesting that there was a lot of overlap between this COVID crisis and the recommendations of the task force. Would you like to talk about that for a second?
Well, I don't know if I would use the term overlap. I would like, a lot of these things have been a dream with this task force that we're doing, coming from a person that has been in the criminal justice system and seeing people go to prison that really didn't need to go. I mean, we've had those tough on crime policies for years, the drugs and all those different kind of things. So, but I mean, what I would really love, and my big dream is if we could get if the governor could go ahead and just make these recommendations executive order until we could get the legislator to push them through, we could give it a try. I mean, like my county, I'm so blessed. We released 100 people on last Friday to get going on trying to reduce that jail population, because we know if somebody comes in with the COVID, we're going to have an epidemic. It's going to spread fast in those jails and prisons. So yeah, that's a dream. I don't know how feasible it is, but if we could keep looking at releasing people all over the state and looking at these different kind of things, there would be a great we could look at what's going on and see what's going to work and what's not going to work, and nip it in the butt before we get to the legislature.
So for those people who in the audience who aren't from Michigan or haven't been following the process, just to take a step back, Chief Justice McCormack, could you give us just a little overview of the process, and especially talk a little bit about, because this really started in a very bipartisan way, which is kind of rare this way. And if we're looking at how this could be done in other places, this might be a model. And so if you could talk to that for a few minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, you bet. Started and finished in a bipartisan way, I would say. I mean, not that we're done yet, but it's been bipartisan throughout. The task force came about as the result of a joint agreement between myself, the governor, the leadership of the legislature, the Michigan Association of Counties. They're important to have at the table because they fund, of course, the county jails. They pay for these policies, literally. And the Michigan Association of Sheriffs, who are the ones who we've left in charge of these growing jail populations. And the five of us signed a joint agreement with the Pew Charitable Trust to staff us in a task force. Well, first to staff us in collecting statewide data for the very first time. Michigan is there are 83 counties in Michigan. There are 81 county jails, and there are 81 systems for collecting data about those county jails. And I mean by that, we had no statewide data. We had no way to really have an understanding of what was driving our jail populations across the state. Maybe in one particular jail, you could look at data and figure out what was going on, but there was no way for us to have an understanding of what was happening statewide. So I always say we won the Pew Charitable Trust lottery, and we had the wonderful assistance of very smart and hardworking staffers from Pew who worked around the state with our different jails and with Michigan State Police data and with court data, and developed for us the first set of statewide data so we could start from there in figuring out what recommendations we might make to the legislature to make improvements. The task force itself was staffed by 18 people. It was the most diverse group of people I think I've ever worked with on a project. A big group, but a diverse group. There were legislators from each party. There were representatives from the counties, representatives from the jails, police and prosecutors, judges, as well as affected people from the community. There were survivors of crime and people who had served time. And once we got that data, that took a number of months for our talented staff at Pew to get that for us. We then worked really hard for a few months at looking at the best practices from around the country. And in subgroups, we broke up into 3 subgroups to look at different parts of this criminal justice process where we could make recommendations to the legislature. So one group worked on arrest, deflection, and diversion. One group worked on the pretrial period, pretrial and bail. And one group worked on sentencing and probation and parole violations, because the jail populations are driven by each part of the process. And there are recommendations we could make in each part of the process. And then we brought those recommendations back to the full group. We talked and talked and talked some more and talked some more and talked some more. And we're able to get to a place where which is what we wanted to do. We had consensus and we could deliver again, a product that reflected the work of a very diverse group of people, a bipartisan group of people, of state and county leaders, as well as members of the community, to the legislature. I should say one other important part of the work we did was around the state. We had our meetings publicly, of course, and we spent at least half of the day during each of those meetings taking comments from the public. And the public comments were pretty important to us. We heard from many people in Traverse City and Grand Rapids and Detroit and here in Lansing. And that was also important to our work. So that's sort of the background and the process part of it all.
And I want to highlight a couple of the things. Monica, both of you ended up taking a trip to the Genesee County Jail. I think I met up with you all right after that. Could you talk about that experience and about anyone and anything you saw while you were at that facility?
You want me to go?
Yeah.
No. You know what was the most impressive thing is when the honorable judge sees something wrong, she grabs it and takes care of it immediately. And when we were up there and she found out that people weren't being taken to the courthouse, she took names and made sure it happened. And that happened in every area we went into. She's so on the job. So that was one of the most beautiful things about going to Genesee. And Genesee, they're doing a good job. I was extremely impressed. They weren't using the commissary with the what is it called, Josh? The secure packs or whatever it is. They have their own commissary inside. Of course, we challenged some of the prices, and so then the sheriff said he went down on some of those. I've gotten follow-up from him, and they really seemed to care about what my input was in the conversation, being an ex-offender. So, I really, really appreciated that. We did a panel with some people inside, and I was so happy to see one of the guys that we had taken out that had been in that county jail for 4 years, away from his family with no bond, to finally be able to walk out of that jail not guilty. I mean, to be able to have reached out and touched and heard this story and what he's been through, as about not being able to have that bond. I guess one of the things that I really liked hearing from the Genesee County jail was in most counties, when people get arrested for child support, at least in my county, they had to have 25% of the bond paid before of their arrearages before they could get out of jail. And what Genesee County does is they have a place for them to go to work every day, and they're paying off the fines and fees until they pay out the fines and fees, the child support, they remain in jail and they go out every day and come back. So I thought that was an interesting idea. I'd have to, look at it more, but it's probably one of the better ideas I see, because I have so many of my own clients that just refuse to go to work and pay for the kids that, they've created on this world. So it was a great experience. I've been asked to go back and talk more to the sheriffs, and I appreciate that. And I work with other sheriffs in other counties, which was great. People reaching out to me to have us ask questions and look into what was going on in the jails.
So Chief Justice McCormack, you talked about going through the public testimony where folks from all over Michigan came out to talk with members of the task force about their experiences with our system. Were there any stories or anything you wanted to talk about that particularly stood out? Because I remember that as a very powerful experience. I was at all the meetings as well.
I mean, there were so many stories that were really impactful, and I was very grateful to so many members of the public who were willing to share those stories. There were so many people who described their loved ones who were struggling with mental illness or mental health conditions, and how inappropriate the county jails were for answering those problems, which is not something we only heard from members of the public and who had family members facing it. We also heard that repeatedly from our deputy sheriffs. I don't think it was at one of our task force meetings, but some other meeting, a deputy sheriff said you wouldn't take someone to a county jail and drop them off with a broken leg and say, this is your problem. But every day, somebody, deputy sheriffs or police officers come to the county jail with somebody who's suffering a serious mental health crisis and drop them off because there's nowhere else to take them. The number of people in our jails, we learned from this task force and this collection of data, who are struggling with serious mental illness is very significant. And nobody believes that the jail is, the sheriffs don't, the police officers don't, the family members who know what their family members need don't believe that jail is a good place to treat mental illness. But it happens to be the main place we treat mental illness in many of our communities right now. So those stories I found pretty moving. Who among us does not have some family member who has had some struggle with mental illness? I have a son who suffered a very serious depression 2 years ago. He lets me talk about it, or I wouldn't be talking about it publicly. I have his permission because he thinks it's important for other people to understand. He is and was a very successful kid, high school athlete who did very well, a freshman at the University of Michigan, who suffered a crippling depression and was suicidal. It's hard for me to talk about it. I don't know, the difference between him and some of the other people I heard who landed in jail was he had a mother who was like all over it and able to get him hospitalized before something else happened. So jail is not a place to treat people with mental illness. We know that, the sheriffs know that, and that's one of the big recommendations in the task force is to respond to that. There were lots of other stories. That one for me in particular, as you can tell, was impactful, but I could go on and on again.
So you talked about the Pew research, and we talked about the recommendations. I know one of the things that I often hear when we talk about things like the jails task force or any kind of reform is that people think, things like if you did the crime, you should do the time, etc. But one of the things that we really learned from the research is that so many of the things that people get incarcerated for are things I don't think anyone understands that people get incarcerated for. One of the ones that just shocked me was driver's licenses. Could either one of you talk about that for a second?
I certainly can, but Monica, I'm hogging the mic again. So you want to?
No, that's okay, because you're much better at this than I am. You got all that data right there, because I know I watch you use it right there on the spot. But yeah, we did have a great conversation and some wonderful things going on about driver's licenses. And because I run a program where I see my clients lose their licenses on a daily basis, and it doesn't make any sense to to tell somebody that they have to get a job and they can't get there because of their license restricted because they owe child support, or they couldn't pay their fines and fees because of the inability, and those different kind of things. So with the recommendations that we made, we spent a very long time at looking at the different things that we could do safely for the community to let people continue to drive after they had their license suspended or didn't had lost their license because they didn't pay the registration for the car, whatever it was that they're going to do. So we made a lot of stipulations and provisions to help people get a license. I know my clients are extremely excited and waiting for these recommendations to come down because it's going to help them so much. And then we just got a decision a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember, it was out of a federal or state court. I know we filed in state, but the inability to pay for the clients that are indigent, that they'll be able to do something else other than hold up their license because they haven't got the money to pay the ticket. So yeah, that this is huge for the state of Michigan to be able to be able to drive again if they owe some type of fines and fees for a parking ticket, or because they drove on a restricted a suspended license or something to that effect. So yeah, those are some great recommendations.
Josh, let me be specific about what
to you, Chief Justice.
I'm sorry, I was talking over you. What'd you say?
I said, did any of the other data or anything else stand out to you?
Well, let me just be more specific about that. I mean, about this traffic issue. Traffic offenses accounted for half of all criminal court cases in 2018. And driving with a suspended license was the third most common reason people went to jail in Michigan. In some of our larger counties, it's the top reason people are going to jail. And I think that would surprise a lot of people. And just to put it in context, the way it happens, and this we heard from police officers and who are frustrated with the requirement that they take people to jail who are driving with a suspended license. They'll pull somebody over who had a previous ticket or a previous court fine or fee that wasn't paid for one reason or the other, sometimes just because they are disorganized, forgot about it, life gets busy. I mean, it happens, that happens to people. Then their license is automatically suspended for failure to pay a fine or a fee or another ticket, an earlier ticket. They don't know it's been suspended. Now they're driving on a suspended license, they get pulled over, and now the police officer must take them to jail. That takes the police officer off the street and off the beat of actually out doing the work of protecting public safety. It takes that person off the street and maybe off their job and off their ability to pay their bills and their taxes and their child support. And it's not clearly helpful. I mean, so the recommendation we made in response to that data was to disaggregate driving with a suspended license from offenses that have nothing to do with driving safety. Of course, it makes sense if someone's been arrested for driving under the influence or reckless driving to suspend their driver's license. We're not recommending never suspending driver's licenses. We are recommending that we don't suspend people's driver's licenses for failure to pay or inability to pay some other ticket or fine or fee, because this is Michigan, man. We drive to work. I mean, somebody should solve the transit problem. That's a task force for another day. But in the meantime, we drive to work in Michigan. Let's let people who owe child support or owe fines or fees get to work to pay them. Let's not put them deeper into a hole that's not making any of us safer.
All right, so as we all know, everything's been put on hold. We have an election coming up. Whenever this is all over, the legislative calendar is going to be pretty crowded, and this is a whole bunch of recommendations. First, Chief Justice McCormack, can you give us kind of an idea of your vision for what happens next?
Yeah, so what happens next was we delivered the task force report to the legislative leaders in January. The Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader both said this was a priority. In fact, the Speaker put his priority on bill drafting for all of the recommendations. As you said at the top of the program, there are already draft bills that reflect a good number of the recommendations. We have sort of two sets of draft bills that are getting vetted and reviewed by all the stakeholders who have input. Our hope was that our hope was to actually get legislation reflecting all of these recommendations done before the summer break. In an election year, we know that our time is short in the legislature. And so our goal was to get them done by the summer break. Obviously, the current public health crisis makes everything a little more complicated, and we fully understand that the legislative leadership and the governor have a lot of, emergency matters that have to be dealt with. But I will say that in some ways, this public health crisis has given us maybe an opportunity to run the experiment, as I like to say. Sometimes someone, in my office will have an idea, and I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, and I'll say, well, let's run the experiment, see how it goes. Right now, there are, judges and prosecutors and sheriffs getting people out of jail who are there, who do not pose a threat to public safety. The prosecutor in Ingham County in particular has been a superstar in this way. And the judges in Ingham County have that jail at the lowest population it's been at, I think, in decades. My guess is we're going to have some good data that's going to show us that we were no less safe as a result of what's happened here during this public health crisis. It's also the case, Josh, that some of the recommendations, while they do take legislation, for example, disaggregating driver's license suspension from offenses that have nothing to do with driving safety, they don't require funding. And some do require funding, and I understand that's going to be complicated given the economic difficulty we're going to face after this particular public health crisis. For example, funding behavioral health diversion is expensive. I always argue it's expensive not to fund it as well in terms of the longer term consequences. But I understand that the priorities that will require funding might be complicated to push through right away, but some of them don't require any funding at all. And we will see immediate reductions in jail populations from legislation that doesn't require funding. And it will save counties money as a result. You'll have people who won't be in jail and they'll instead be paying their child support, going to work. So I guess my view is, yes, this public health crisis has thrown basically all of our worlds upside down. That's true for, and some more than others. People are actually struggling with being sick. But I still think there's an awful lot we can get done, and I'm not gonna let my foot off the gas.
Monica, as we're wrapping up, kind of before I go to questions, do you have any thoughts about, as you're one of my sisters in Nation Outside, you've been organizing for a long time. Can you talk about how people might be able to join in to try to help make sure and support this when it happens, once it starts getting to the website?
Oh, we're definitely going to have to call in the troops when this gets ready. And I just informed Justice McCormack that I want to be on the front lines when we start going to our legislators. And I would like to bring a lot of the stories with me. The stories are the key to this conversation. When we go into legislators' office and they start hearing some of the things, you can just watch the reaction and the light bulbs going off in their minds when you hear some of the stories of the different people that are going on. And we have a story for every one of these recommendations on why it would be more feasible to do this or conducive, and definitely not be a threat to the public safety. And of course, I hope, I said on Nation Outside, of course, I'm going to ask all of my team at Nation Outside to join us. We'll start doing the different kind of things like we're doing with the clean slate right now. And I've got a lot, like I said, a lot of my clients are coming in, they're getting their stories ready because they want to help support what they're doing. I have a mental health court in my, a specialty court. I have a Swift Insure court. I have a day reporting court. I have a millage court. So I have every one of the dynamics in my office so that I can pay attention to what we can do better. And I'm going bring that to the legislators so that they can see that, you know, this is going to happen. I hope to reach out and find the people that are, you know, our county is releasing from jail to make sure that they got the services. I've opened up a Facebook account so that we can look and see what it is that they needed, so that when we start doing this legislation, we can say to them, yes, if we had these in place at the time, you know, this made them a lot more successful. I have actually had people standing at my door, Josh, with the place locked down at the church, waiting for somebody when they see a car. And I walked out and I had 4 different clients at different times that I had years ago. And they say, Monica, you always promised me you would be there. I'm in a crisis right now. I don't have any money. I can't get on unemployment. I can't do those different kind of things. And that's what our legislators need to hear. If they can hear from these people that are, you know, that it would benefit to be able to have that driver's license and do those different kind of things. So I am definitely going to be out, you know, rounding up the troops and getting as much support as I can all over the state. We got a lot of great support when we were doing the task force. Traverse City was a great example of how we found a lot of people really ready to help try to do that different kind of stuff. So I'll definitely be on the front lines trying to get the message out and get people to help us get this legislation passed as soon as possible.
All right, let's go to some audience questions. The first one is, has there been a focus from the state government on freeing private prisoners in Michigan? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
What? What did you just say, Josh?
Has there been a focus from the state government on freeing private prisoners in Michigan?
Oh, I wouldn't. You know, I'm not a private prisoner fan.
You know, I guess I could take a short stab at this.
Yeah, you probably know the answer better, both of us.
My understanding is that there is not an actual effort right now at the state level to try to free private prisoners. The good news is there aren't very many people in private prisons in Michigan. The bad news is, you know, from the perspective of people who believe that any private prison is a bad private prison, and that's not a good thing. Certainly be willing to talk to anyone about that later. This next one's for Judge McCormack. What priorities do you see for rapid response to COVID risks? Are there certain jurisdictions or regions that need special support from organizations?
I'm sorry, the first part of the question again?
What priorities do you see for rapid response to COVID risks?
Yeah. If you mean rapid response to COVID risks in courts and prisons, I mean in courts and jails, I think that they're going to be, the places where they're going to be needed are in the places where we're seeing the greatest number of cases, which right now is Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb. But I, you know, I know that our county leaders in all of those places are working hard on that now. Frankly, I think the rapid responses that we need, rapid response we need right now is in healthcare services and equipment, and that's, you know, that's the first priority right now.
This next question is for Chief Justice McCormack, and it's from my friend Angie at the Free Press. We know that in some counties, judges and sheriff's offices are reviewing cases for early release from jail because of COVID-19. Is the Michigan Supreme Court issuing any guidance to judges on how to go about administrative jail release?
No, the Michigan Supreme Court has not, and I don't think will, because it's actually not a question that the Michigan Supreme Court decides. It is a question that county judges, together with their sheriffs, have some authority to do. And as I said earlier, a number of them are doing it. I don't actually have a full data set about who's done what, so my information is sort of piecemeal depending on who I've talked to in which jurisdiction. I know, for example, in Ingham, especially with the help and leadership of the prosecutor, they've done significant work reducing the county jail population, of course, just in terms of folks who were not posing a public safety. And I believe that a number of other jails and chief judges have done the same. There are statutes that permit some leeway to judges for both jail overcrowding that might be defined differently during a public health crisis that requires isolation, as well as a judge always has the authority to reconsider bond. That's always the case. And there is another statute that permits a 25% reduction on sentences depending on how somebody has done in their sentence. And sheriffs regularly can make recommendations to judges about particular folks who have done well and deserve that 25% reduction. My understanding is that there are judges around the state that are actively doing that or have already done that. And I personally am grateful to them and will encourage them to keep doing it. I can't speak for the rest of my colleagues. I speak here, to be clear, Angie, for myself.
This next, I'm sorry, so many of these are for Chief Justice McCormack, but another one for Chief Justice McCormack. Thank you for sharing your personal experience relating to your son and you as a mother. I totally felt your heart. Do the recommendations from the report address various levels of violent crimes outside of what's listed in the table classification in the report? And my guess is they're probably asking why we make the violent, nonviolent distinction to some extent.
Yeah. And I guess if the questioner wants to follow up, and because I'm worried I won't answer the right question. I mean, I don't think that the recommendations address what I think the questioner is asking, because there are some carve-outs for some of the recommendations for violent crimes, as well as some other specific carve-outs for some of the recommendations. For whatever it's worth, I think there is an important conversation to be had about how we reckon with violence in our communities and in our criminal justice system. And I didn't get to this answer when you asked me earlier, Josh, but one of the most powerful comments from a member of the public was a dad who lost his daughter to a violent crime, and he himself had served time in prison. And he wanted us to understand how dissatisfied as a victim of crime, as a survivor of crime, losing his daughter, how, in his view, the current system did not serve him, that he did not, he wanted a process, a different kind of process, and asked for it repeatedly and was not able to get any kind of restorative process that, in his view, would have helped him and his family cope with this tremendous loss. There is a really important conversation we need to be having in our criminal justice system and in our communities about violent crime, which is so easy for elected officials to sort of carve out and put somewhere else. But we heard repeatedly from families who have had to cope with violent crime that they haven't been satisfied with the system either. So even though I think these recommendations don't speak to that, I think it's an important conversation that we should be having. Okay, if I didn't answer the question, I hope you'll ask me a follow-up. I'm happy to keep trying.
I don't see one yet, but I have one last question. Someone asks, I have seen jail transcribing data in their system, and they get from the prosecuting attorney and then by court-based on sentencing. Was any study done by the task force to measure inaccuracy in transcribing this data and how this has impacted length of imprisonments? And I don't have a take on that one.
No, the task force did not look at that, and I am not aware of any data on that. It sounds like an interesting question. I myself am not very helpful to you on it. I apologize.
Oh, one last question. Why is the policy to give soap for hand washing only to the indigent, I'm assuming in jails? The soap provided to indigents is often out of stock. If they can't handle this basic need, it's difficult to have confidence that they have stepped up in this crisis.
Monica might know better on that one than I do.
Well, yeah, I've been definitely having conversations all over the state with different prisoners and county jails, trying to find out what's going on so that, maybe there is something we can do to intervene, Josh. I heard today that somebody that's working as a porter at one of the hospitals up in Jackson said that they took all the hand soap away from the prisoners. I said, that really doesn't even make sense. But you know how rumors go. You know, you've got to be able to figure out fact from fiction. He said that there was 5 cases sitting up in Jackson. And I don't know if, you know, that how true that could be, because we know how HIPAA laws go. So, you know, we're getting different stories and hearing these different kind of things about, you know, what's going on in the prisoners' jail. You know, I'm really trying to stay on top of making sure everybody that I have contact with from the Ingham County Jail, I go find out so they can tell me what's going on, so I could reach out to the sheriff to see what's going on. And anybody that, you know, wants to reach out and do that, I'd be glad to try to contact, you know, people to see if we can get whatever it is that we need to I have been in, when I was in prison, there was probably not a week that went by that we did not have a medical situation. If it wasn't scabies, if it was MRSA, if it was sore, whatever, HIV, we always were locked down. We always had to wash. We always had the fear. We always had the rumor. We always had guards treating us like talking to us like we were dogs. So I've been in those situations, and my empathy truly makes me want to go make sure that all of the people through the state of Michigan are going to be all right. So, you know I'm on top of it. I know Justice McCormack has got a million things. So we'll do our share and have her back being the formerly incarcerated. Josh, I know we're on top of that game.
The last thing I want to say is thanks so much to both of you and to everyone who is listening. Before I turn it back over to Troy, I just want to say it's been quite an experience as an organizer to put this whole thing together as an in-person event and then have to learn how to put it together as a virtual event. This is our last event, last panel of the day. So I just want to thank everyone who participated throughout the day. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Troy. Troy? Okay, maybe not Troy, I'll do it. Safe and Just Michigan, thank you so much for participating. Safe and Just Michigan, Cut 50, and all our co-sponsors, thank you for participating in today's Day of Empathy event. This is the last panel of the day. So we want to thank each of our co-sponsors for helping us to get the news out after this event changed. Our national partner, Cut 50, AFSC Michigan Criminal Justice Program, A.R.R.O, Citizens for Prison Reform, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, Michigan Center for Youth Justice, Michigan Faith in Action, Nation Outside, Still Standing Against Domestic Violence, Redeemed, the University of Michigan Carceral State Project, the University of Michigan Prison Creative Arts Project. On the screen, we have included several ways that you can keep in contact with Safe and Just Michigan. We hope you will use the hashtags Day of Empathy, hashtag WhyEmpathy, and hashtag Empathy365 on social media to engage with other people participating in the Day of Empathy all across the country. We also hope you will let us know if you enjoyed this panel. Fill out our exit survey at bit.ly, that's bit.ly/MIDOESURBEY. That's bit.ly/MIDOE survey. Thanks again for participating in today's panel and today's event. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Chief Justice.
Yeah.